When people think about Steve Jobs, they usually remember the products: the Macintosh, the iPod, the iPhone, the black turtleneck, the dark stage, and the sentence that told the audience there was one more thing to see. But the decision that made Steve Jobs a legend was not the decision to create the iPhone. It happened almost 10 years earlier, at a moment when Apple was not the powerful company we know today. Apple was confused, losing money, struggling to explain its own products, and getting dangerously close to becoming irrelevant. Jobs returned to the company he had helped create and made a decision that looked almost reckless. He decided that Apple needed to do less, much less. Instead of trying to save every project, satisfy every department, and compete in every possible category, Apple would concentrate on only a handful of products. Jobs was willing to cancel years of work, disappoint loyal customers, and tell talented teams that their projects had no future. It sounds simple when we look back at it, but this decision reveals something important about business, creativity, and even everyday life. Most people believe progress comes from adding more features, more ideas, more choices, more projects, more meetings, more opportunities. Jobs understood that sometimes progress begins with subtraction. And to understand why that mattered, we need to go back to the Apple of the mid-1990s. Apple had once represented the future of personal computing. The Apple II helped bring computers into homes and schools, and the Macintosh introduced a visual, intuitive interface to a much wider audience. But a company can create the future and still lose its place in it. Jobs had left Apple in 1985 after a painful struggle for control. During the following years, he created Next and became deeply involved with Pixar. Both companies struggled, and both taught him a lesson. Survival sometimes requires choosing an essential purpose and removing the businesses that distract from it. In 1996, Apple needed a modern operating system and purchased NEXT, bringing Jobs back as an advisor. It was a remarkable irony. The company that had pushed him out now needed technology from the company he had built after leaving. But the Apple Jobs returned to was very different from the one he remembered. The problem was not that Apple had no intelligent people. It had excellent engineers, designers, programmers, and managers. The problem was that all of their intelligence was scattered across too many directions. Apple sold a confusing collection of computers with names and numbers that were difficult to understand. Different models overlapped with one another. Some products seemed designed for professionals, some for ordinary consumers, some for schools, and some for markets that even Apple struggled to define clearly. The company was also developing printers, servers, software, accessories, experimental devices, and the Newton, an ambitious handheld computer that was years ahead of the smartphone era, but had never become a major commercial success. From the outside, this could look like innovation. From the inside, it was fragmentation. Imagine a restaurant with a menu containing 200 dishes. It sounds impressive, but the kitchen needs more ingredients, more training, more storage, and more procedures. Customers take longer to decide, and because the chefs divide their attention, few dishes become exceptional. A company can suffer from the same problem. Every additional product creates more than one responsibility. It requires engineering, design, management, marketing, support, suppliers, packaging, documentation, and future updates. It also competes with every other product for money, factory capacity, and attention. Attention is a limited resource. Money can sometimes be raised and more employees can be hired, but leadership attention and creative energy cannot expand without limit. Moving repeatedly between projects also creates switching costs. Part of the mind remains attached to the previous problem, so the more often people switch, the more energy they lose. Across an entire company, that loss becomes enormous. Apple was not only doing too much, it was making talented people less effective by forcing their attention to travel in too many directions. Jobs began reviewing the company and asking very basic questions. What products are we making? Who is each product for? Why does this model exist? How is it different from that model? What should a customer buy? The answers were often unclear. Jobs later explained that even after studying the product line for weeks, he still found it difficult to understand. Customers were confused as well. That detail matters. When the people inside a company cannot explain its choices simply, the customers outside the company have very little chance. Confusion creates friction. Friction is anything that makes a decision more difficult. It can be a complicated form, an unclear price, too many buttons, an unnecessary step, or a product line that requires research before the buyer even understands the options. Businesses often focus on persuading people to say yes, but before persuasion can work, customers must understand what they are saying yes to. A confused customer rarely studies harder. Usually, the customer leaves. Jobs and his team eventually reduced Apple's strategy to an extremely simple diagram. On a whiteboard, they created 4 spaces. On one side were 2 kinds of customer, consumer and professional. On the other side were 2 kinds of computer, desktop and portable. That produced 4 basic categories: a desktop for ordinary consumers, a portable computer for ordinary consumers, a desktop for professionals, and a portable computer for professionals. That was the plan. Not 15 overlapping product families, not a computer for every imaginable variation of customer, 4 clear destinations. Jobs believed that if Apple concentrated on 4 excellent products, the company could place its strongest people on each one. Teams could improve products more frequently. Engineers could think beyond the current version because they were not constantly rescuing a dozen unrelated projects. The power of the diagram was not its visual design. The power was what it eliminated. Jobs cut most of the existing product roadmap. Projects that had consumed years of effort disappeared. Products with passionate supporters were cancelled. Employees lost jobs. Teams that believed in their work were told to stop. This is the uncomfortable part of the story. Focus sounds elegant in a presentation. In reality, focus is often painful. Every project has a history. Someone proposed it, defended it, and stayed late to solve its problems. Once people invest time, money, reputation, and emotion, abandoning the work becomes extremely difficult. Economists call this the sunk cost problem. A sunk cost is a resource already spent and impossible to recover. Imagine buying an expensive ticket to an outdoor event. When the day arrives, the weather is terrible and you feel ill. The ticket price is gone whether you attend or not. The rational question is which choice will make the rest of the day better, but many people attend simply because they already paid. Companies behave the same way. They continue projects because millions have been invested, a department was created, or cancellation would feel like an admission of failure. Jobs was unusually willing to ask a colder question: does this project deserve more time and attention tomorrow? That did not make every cancellation correct. Some abandoned ideas contained real potential. The Newton explored concepts that later appeared in smartphones and tablets. But Jobs was not asking whether a project contained any good ideas. Almost every serious project does. He was asking whether it was one of the few things Apple should place at the center of its future. This leads to opportunity cost. Whenever we choose one path, we give up the benefits of paths we cannot take at the same time. If Apple placed its best designers on 10 projects, the hidden cost was that none of those projects received their complete attention. Opportunity cost is difficult to see because it is made of invisible alternatives, the better product delayed, weakened, or never created. Jobs' 4-product strategy made opportunity cost visible. Every new idea now had to compete with a clear question: is this important enough to take talent away from one of our 4 essential products? If the answer was no, Apple could reject the idea even if it was interesting. This is what real strategy looks like. Strategy is sometimes confused with ambition. A company announces that it wants to lead in computers, entertainment, communication, artificial intelligence, education, health, finance, and every other exciting market, but a list of ambitions is not a strategy. Strategy is a system for making choices when resources are limited. It tells you not only what deserves attention, but what does not. Imagine sunlight spread across a large room. It provides light and warmth, but it does not burn anything. Pass that same light through a magnifying lens, concentrate the energy into a small point, and the effect changes completely. Focus does not necessarily create more energy. It directs existing energy. Apple already had talented people. Jobs' decision allowed their talent to become concentrated. The decision also changed the internal experience of work. When a team knows its project is one of the company's highest priorities, decisions become faster, budgets are clearer, leaders are available, and people understand why the work matters. When a project is one of dozens, everyone wonders whether it will still exist next year. Jobs described employees whose projects had been cancelled, but who still felt excited because they finally understood where Apple was going. Losing work is painful, but directionless work can be even more exhausting. People can accept difficult decisions more easily when the logic is clear. The four-box strategy was simple enough for everyone to remember. That matters because strategies only influence behavior when they travel beyond the meeting in which they were created. A clear strategy becomes a filter that engineers, designers, marketers, and salespeople can use without asking senior leadership to decide everything. One of the first major products to express the new Apple was the iMac. At the time, personal computers were usually beige, rectangular, and visually forgettable. They looked like equipment. They were sold through technical specifications, numbers, processor speeds, storage capacity, and lists of components. The iMac looked completely different. It was an all-in-one computer with a rounded, translucent body and a bright blue-green color. It felt friendly, modern, and almost playful. The design suggested that a computer did not need to look like industrial machinery. But the iMac was not only a cosmetic redesign. Its simplicity reflected a larger idea about the user experience. For many ordinary customers in the late 1990s, connecting a computer to the internet could be confusing. The iMac was presented as a machine designed to make that process easier. Even the name connected the product to the growing importance of the internet. Apple also removed technologies that many people expected, including the floppy disk drive and supported USB, which was still relatively new. This created criticism. And the criticism was understandable. Removing familiar technology can feel hostile to existing users. People own accessories, they have habits, they depend on old formats. A company that moves too quickly can create real inconvenience. But design always contains a prediction about the future. Keeping every old feature protects the past, but it can also make the future more complicated. This is another form of focus. A well-designed product is not the product with the greatest number of features. It is the product whose features support a coherent experience. A remote control with 100 buttons may be technically capable, but that capability is useless if most people are afraid to touch it. Simplicity does not mean removing things randomly. It means understanding what the user is trying to achieve and removing whatever does not help enough to justify its cost. Minimalism is a visual style. Simplicity is a problem-solving discipline. Apple also controlled both the hardware and much of the software, allowing teams to shape the complete experience. This approach, often called vertical integration, has disadvantages. The company carries more responsibility and must be good at several connected activities. Its advantage is coherence. A focused product line made that integration manageable. With fewer devices, teams could pay attention to the relationship between design, software, packaging, and everyday use instead of treating each part as a separate problem. The result was not immediate perfection. Apple still made mistakes. Products failed. Features were delayed. Some designs were beautiful but impractical. Jobs could be harsh, impatient, and wrong. It is important not to turn business history into mythology. No company is saved by one person standing at a whiteboard. Apple's recovery required engineers, designers, operations experts, software developers, marketers, retail partners, suppliers, and customers willing to trust the company again. People such as Jony Ive helped shape the design language. Tim Cook later transformed operations and supply chains. Avi Tavanian and teams from Next helped create the technological foundation that evolved into Mac OS X. Thousands of employees turned a clear direction into real products. The decision belonged to a leader. The achievement belonged to a team. But leadership matters because teams need a way to concentrate their effort. Jobs' contribution was not that he personally invented every component. It was that he made a small number of decisions feel more important than a large number of possibilities. Apple also needed an identity. In 1997, the Think Different campaign celebrated people associated with creativity and changing the world instead of advertising computers, mainly through technical specifications. Apple wanted to present itself as a company building tools for people who saw possibilities others missed. This was brand positioning. A brand is not only a logo or a name, it is the pattern of expectations and emotions that appears in a person's mind when they encounter a company. Strong brands reduce the amount of explanation required, but the promise must be supported by the product. Apple could not tell the world to think differently while selling a confusing collection of ordinary machines. The product strategy and the marketing strategy had to reinforce each other. The 4-product plan answered, "What are we making?" Think Different answered, "Why should anyone care?" The same principle applies to a YouTube channel. Viewers do not only subscribe to individual topics, they return for a recognizable kind of experience. Apple's pattern became easier to recognize. Fewer products, stronger design, clearer stories, and a more controlled experience. Jobs made another difficult decision during this period. He accepted a partnership with Microsoft. To many Apple supporters, Microsoft was the enemy. But Apple needed stability, continued support for Microsoft Office on the Mac, confidence from developers, and time. Microsoft agreed to keep developing important Mac software and invested $150 million in non-voting Apple stock. When some people reacted angrily to the announcement, Jobs argued that Apple did not need Microsoft to lose in order to win. This showed another kind of focus. A company in danger cannot build its strategy around emotional revenge. It must separate the real goal from the symbolic battle. Focus sometimes means ignoring the fight that feels satisfying so you can win the one that matters. By 1998, Apple's situation was improving. The company returned to profitability, and the iMac became a major success. Within a few years, Apple announced that it had shipped its 5 millionth iMac. The important point is not that one colorful computer magically rescued the company. The iMac was evidence that the system was beginning to work. A focused product line allowed design, engineering, manufacturing, marketing, and leadership to move in the same direction. The company could explain the product in a sentence. Customers could understand who it was for. Employees knew it mattered. Success created confidence. Confidence attracted attention. Attention created room for the next product. Apple developed Mac OS X using technology with roots in Next. It expanded into digital music with iTunes and the iPod. It created retail stores where it could control how products were presented and supported. Later came the iPhone and the App Store, followed by the iPad and other categories. It is tempting to draw a straight line and pretend the 4-box diagram contained the entire future. It did not. Jobs did not draw an iPhone in one of the boxes in 1997. The strategy changed as Apple became stronger and new technologies created new opportunities. This shows that focus is not the same as permanent limitation. The goal of focus is not to remain small forever. The goal is to build enough strength to expand deliberately. A weak company that enters 10 markets may become weaker. A strong company with a clear capability can enter a new market and change it. The difference is sequence. First, concentrate, then learn, then expand from strength. This pattern appears everywhere. A restaurant becomes famous for a few dishes before opening more locations. A filmmaker masters smaller productions before directing a major one. A creator develops one recognizable format before experimenting with several. Expansion is strongest when it grows from an identity rather than trying to replace the absence of one. Jobs' decision also explains why saying no is harder than saying yes. Yes feels creative and keeps people happy in the moment. No creates immediate disappointment. But every yes creates future obligations, maintenance, updates, support, meetings, and trade-offs. The person approving an idea experiences the excitement of its beginning. The organization experiences the full cost of its lifetime. Healthy teams therefore need a high standard for starting things. The question is not simply whether an idea is good, it is whether the idea is important enough to deserve years of attention and delay other good ideas. Of course, concentration has risks. A company focused on the wrong product may fail faster. and a leader can misuse the language of simplicity to silence disagreement. Focus must be built on understanding. Jobs and his team reviewed products, spoke with customers, and recognized Apple's remaining strength in education and creative work. Good focus requires 3 questions. Who are we serving? What problem are we especially able to solve? And what must we stop doing so we can solve it exceptionally well? Without clear answers, subtraction creates a smaller, confused company. With clear answers, it reveals strength that was already present. Most of us will never run a global company, but nearly everyone experiences the same problem at a smaller scale. We collect ambitions, learn a language, start a business, exercise, read more, create videos, invest, travel, and become more organized. Each goal may be valuable. Together, they can become a product line no one understands. When everything is important, the mind has no guidance about what to do next, and the result is often guilt instead of progress. Jobs' whiteboard offers a useful exercise. Take a blank page and define a small number of categories that represent what matters most during the next season of your life or work. For a creator, those categories might be audience, subject, format, and publishing rhythm. For a small business, they might be one customer, one problem, one product, and one reliable way to reach people. Then, look at every commitment and ask where it belongs. If it fits nowhere, that does not mean it is bad. It may simply not belong now. Saying no today does not destroy an idea. It protects the few ideas that need your attention first. It can also help to create a stop-doing list. Most people record what they want to begin, but very few decide deliberately what they will end. Removing a weak obligation can create more energy than adding a new productivity tool. Clear rules also reduce decision fatigue. A regular publishing schedule removes repeated timing decisions. A defined audience reduces topic decisions. A limited product line removes thousands of small decisions across a company. A rule is not always a restriction. Sometimes it is freedom from repeated uncertainty. Constraints can even improve creativity. Unlimited possibility often makes it difficult to begin. Give a writer a clear audience, length, and question, and ideas arrive more easily. The 4 categories did not make the iMac conservative. They gave Apple's creativity a target. The whiteboard also made the strategy easy to communicate. A strategy should work like a map. It removes most details and preserves what people need in order to move together. Apple's message could be remembered without a presentation. Make fewer products, make them better, serve clear customers, rebuild the company around creativity. Because the story was easy to repeat, it became easier to act on. The decision made Jobs a legend, not because reducing a product line was a completely new idea. Businesses had simplified before him. It made him a legend because of the scale of the bet, the clarity of the choice, and what followed. He returned to the company he had lost. He found an organization full of talent but without concentration. And instead of trying to prove his brilliance by adding a grand collection of new ideas, he began by removing most of what already existed. That requires a particular kind of confidence. Insecure leadership often adds visible activity. More initiatives create the appearance of progress. More projects make a leader look ambitious. More features create longer presentations. Subtraction is less theatrical. The projects that never launch do not receive applause. The meetings that no longer happen are not photographed. The confusion that customers never experience is difficult to measure, but much of great design is invisible. It is the button you do not need, the instruction you do not have to read, the delay that never happens. The product you can understand immediately. The same is true of great strategy. Its value appears in the problems an organization no longer creates for itself. There is a final reason this decision mattered so much. It changed the definition of innovation inside Apple. Innovation was no longer the number of experiments the company could keep alive. It became the ability to transform a few important ideas into complete experiences. Ideas are common. Execution is rare. A sketch can be created in minutes. A prototype may take weeks. But building a product that millions of people can understand, afford, purchase, use, repair, update, and recommend requires years of coordinated work. Focus carries an idea across that entire distance. Without focus, Organizations become museums of promising beginnings. With focus, a small number of beginnings become finished work. Steve Jobs is remembered for presenting finished work. But the stage presentations were the visible end of a much less glamorous process, choosing, cancelling, concentrating, revising, and saying no repeatedly until the remaining idea felt inevitable. The iMac, the iPod, and the iPhone were different products created at different moments. What connected them was not one piece of technology. It was a philosophy of attention. Understand the experience. Choose what matters. Integrate the pieces. Remove what weakens the idea, explain it simply, and place exceptional people on a small number of meaningful problems. That philosophy did not make Jobs perfect. It did not make Apple incapable of failure, and it should never be used to excuse cruelty, arrogance, or the belief that one visionary deserves all the credit. But it does explain why his return to Apple became one of the most studied turnarounds in modern business. The decision that made Steve Jobs a legend was not a decision to predict one magical product. It was the decision to create an environment where magical products had a chance to be completed. He understood that the opposite of focus is not creativity. The opposite of focus is diluted effort. And perhaps that is the most useful lesson in this entire story. Your future may not depend on discovering one more opportunity. It may depend on recognizing which opportunities are stealing attention from the one that matters. The next great thing you build may not begin when you add a new idea. It may begin when you take a blank page, draw a few simple boxes, and finally decide what you are willing to leave outside them.